Good evening. Welcome back to Mount Olive. Let's sing number 903. 903.
So Good evening. I want to thank each of you for coming out tonight. Turn with me to James 1. And while you're finding that in your Bibles, I'll just say I don't think it's been said who is talking tonight. It's going to be Delynn Rosenberry and Brandon Eby. And I will talk just a little bit more about that and after our short devotions here. James chapter 1, I want to start reading at verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variance, neither shadow of turning. Of his own will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, which is able to save your souls. But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself, and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the word, this man shall be blessed in his deed. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the word. And I want to think about that last verse. First of all, and Faith Mission is a place that takes care of those that are not able to take care of themselves, obviously. And thinking of service, one of the main aspects of the Christian faith is service. We say that we're part of an upside-down kingdom where those that are in leadership are taught to serve. Whether you're on the mission field at a place like Faith Mission or other VS places here and there, or maybe spending a week or two on a work project, our focus is to spread the gospel to people that need to hear it, and taking care of people, like I said, that are not able to take care of it themselves. And people that do these kind of things are not there for the money. There's a want to. When you don't clock in or you don't keep track of your time, your work looks a little bit different. If I were to call my employees, the few that aren't related to me, I called them and said, hey, by the way, last week we were doing volunteer work. They probably wouldn't come to work tomorrow. It's just different. Service for Jesus, we're there because we want to, and it changes our perspective a little bit. Verse 17, every great thing is from God. Any kind of blessings that we say that we have comes from God. And it calls him the Father of lights in this verse. 1 John 1:5 says this is a message we've heard from him and declare to you, God is light, in him there is no darkness at all. And I quote, no cloud, no darkness seems to come from the sun, but it pours its rich brilliance onto the farthest part of the universe. So it is with God. And we know if we talk about light and darkness that the only way to stop the light is to actually block it with darkness. And God's truth is the same way. His truth and his moral light shines out through the universe and can be traced back to him. Another little phrase I wanted to pick up here is in 19, it says, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak. We can't learn if we don't listen. If we just talk, we won't learn anything. So we need to be still and listen. And then a few verses down, it says, be a doer of the word and not only just listening. So we have to take what we learned and actually put it into practice. And one of the things we'll learn tonight we can do is in service. I want to think that most people that go into service want to be doers and not just listeners. And so Brandon and DeLynn, they both went to the same place, and in case you think it's a little bit redundant, it somewhat came to us just by, not that we planned just those two to talk, but I had to think that it's very ironic. Darwin and I were born in 1970. I don't think there's anybody in this church within 4 years of that, so we're close in age. Our children are close in age. Brandon and DeLynn worked with a fellow named Tom Yoder at Plastech, and he invited them to come and take a peek at Faith Mission. Of course, they decided to go down there. They weren't there completely at the same time, but their terms did overlap quite a bit. And just to add to all this, two families doing the same thing, both of them had sisters follow them there, younger sisters. Now, I know that their jobs there were just a little bit different. I don't think it's going to be redundant what they talk about tonight, and I know they have plenty to say, so I'm going to go ahead and let them do their thing. DeLynn will be the first one to come up.
Well, good evening. Thanks to each of you that made an effort to come out tonight and hear us talk about a place that we spent a lot of time and effort at. It's been 7 or 8 months now, I think, since I left Faith Mission. So it's starting to feel a lot less distant in my mind. Or starting to feel more distant in my mind is what I meant to say. But it's amazing how every time I go back, it still feels like home. It still feels kind of like a second place to me. To start off, how many of you have been there to Faith Mission? All right. It's a decent chunk. I feel like if I would ask you that 3 years ago, there would have been a significant less number of you that were there. I highly recommend. If you get the chance, swing past. It is one of the most warm, receptive places that you will show up at. Ask for a tour. You don't even have to know anyone there. They'll gladly show you around. And I will say, being there and having church people come, it's fun. You can go and it's our place, and you guys come, we get to show you around, and I'm thankful that I had the privilege to do that with some of you that made the trip down. All right. I did a similar talk a number of months back, and it took a significant amount of time, so I'm going to try to keep it flowing here. I was there nearly 20 months. I'm going to give just a basic description of Faith Mission, a little bit of the history, and then my experiences there. Brandon's going to cover the cottage program specifically, and also like some staff life stuff there. So hopefully we divided it up with similar equal amount of time. If you didn't know, Faith Mission Home is a handicapped children's home in Virginia. If you know where Harrisonburg is, it's about an hour's drive east from there on Route 33. So really not that far away. So there's approximately 170 people that live there. I don't know if that would have been the number you would have guessed or not. It's a chunk of people. 55 of them would be students. Briefly explain, they used to be called residents, but they are called, in the past 4 years probably, they started calling them students. Switching the focus from being more of a long-term care place to more of a training facility there. And that has been a big upside to the place. There's been a lot more new students coming in, which just brings a lot of new life to get the younger students there. 50 of those people are the single staff from all over. There's been, about the time that I went, I think it was shortly after I came, they hit 1,500 staff. Every staff that comes gets a number. And I don't remember exactly, I think it was like 1,470 or 1,480 something, somewhere in there. So that was kind of a big milestone, 1,500 staff, single staff that have served there. The remaining 65 or so people represent the campus families. There's 12 families that live on the campus, many different roles. 4 of those families are administration, and the other 8 are house parents or maintenance families. They just keep things flowing there. There's a day They do it every 2 years. I think it's usually in May or June. They call it Zoo Day, and some of the students, it's one of their favorite times. They talk about Zoo Day a lot, and the entire campus goes, 170 people, and it is exactly what you'd imagine it to be. It's basically taking the zoo to the zoo, more or less. Throw in there 55 awesome special needs children, and it's a crazy time, taking them around, showing them animals. Anyway, also the number of buildings on Faith Mission. Parents Weekend is a time when all the parents are invited to come to Faith Mission and experience our world there. We treat them with royalty, the best meals, and there's a lot of stuff that happens that weekend. It's a highlight of the year. Anyway, my first Parents Weekend, which was like 6 weeks after I was there, obviously Mom and Dad came down, and they had a guessing thing to see who could get, it was like a door prize thing to see who could guess the amount of buildings. And Mom somehow hit the perfect number. But there's 68 buildings on the campus there. So, small village, like I was saying before. There's 15 houses, 2 wood shops, a bakery, a farm, a park. We have our own gas pumps there. There's a little cabin. There's a package delivery shed, mechanic shop, truck patch, a small sawmill, a church, and a school. So that's just some of the buildings. All right, so just for a brief history, there are some people that know a lot more about the history than I do. Sanford Yoder was kind of the one that had the main brainchild to start this thing. He was the father of Pablo Yoder. Most of you probably know that. Pablo is the one that wrote the books like the work of his fingers and some various books like that. So he was the one that originally had a love for the mountain people there in the area and desired to share the love of Christ with them. And he discovered this 300-foot-long building in the mountains and kind of came up with the idea for a handicapped children's home. It wasn't always that way. There was some discussion of starting another old people's home, but for various reasons that fell through. And I think it was meant to be that way. There's others of those, and it's a lot of fun being able to work with handicapped children. The building is built of native stone off the mountain. If you get there to see it, it's something else. It's a really narrow building, but it's really long, 300 feet long, like I was saying. It's very interesting design, and the stonework is really cool. Let's see. So it was originally owned by the Episcopalian Church, which Episcopalian Church today is not much to behold. If you stay there, they're usually the ones with the rainbow flags outside. So they were the ones that started the Episcopalian Church. It was known as St. Anne's Preventorium. And I didn't know what a preventorium was. I had to look that up. Maybe some of you do. A preventorium is a building or an institution that provided treatment or preventative care for people, especially children with diseases like tuberculosis. Preventoriums were popular in the early 20th century. It was used as kind of a hospital for the mountain people, and the need of it diminished a lot as diseases like tuberculosis became a lot more treatable. There just wasn't the need for it there, and so it kind of fizzled out. I don't remember everything that led up to Sanford Yoder or the local churches there buying it and starting the mission. But that happened, and before that happened, it served the mountain people there as the Preventorium for 37 years before Faith Mission was started. And after it started, Sanford was the first administrator there. He was one of the primary people behind it. He was there for many, many years. And he did a lot of work there. The first children started coming a month after it opened, and the rest is history. It opened in 1965, and in 1967 it was full at 40 children. And it still is 40 children at the main home. It's expanded to like 55 or even nice more than that actually with the cottage program, which Brandon's going to get to. It's grown and changed a lot over the years. The general premise is still the same today. That leads me to the mission statement, which I'll just briefly read over. It's not very long, and it gives a good idea of what the actual goal is there at Faith Mission. It's to teach the student that God loves all people, cares for him, and wants to help him do what is right and shun what is wrong. To provide an environment in which the student feels loved, secure, accepted, and appreciated. To develop positive character traits of truthfulness, dependability, and responsibility. To help the student develop to the best of his or her potential, making him feel needed, productive, and successful within the scope of his abilities. And to train the student in the exercise of proper conduct and in the development of communication skills. All right, so now for some of my experience there, I'll tell you a bit of how it was for me, and then some things that I've learned. So the students are from all over. Many have very fascinating stories. Some have been there for 40 plus years. During my term there was, I should have wrote it down, but probably at least six new students that came, which is huge. Some of the people before me would have served and not had a single new student come. Or maybe one or two cottage students, which the cottage students tend to come and go more frequently. And they can be any age. We refer to them as children. Some of them they're 40s and 50s. So that's something that people get wrong. So in some ways, you could say it can be an old people's home, but that has been shifting more as new students have been coming. And there's also an interesting shift that's happened. People often wonder if they're plain people or not, the students that is. And that's a shift that's happened when the home first started. It was primarily people from the world. I mean, some of them might have been professing Christians, but not Mennonite, Amish background. And that shift, so more recently, the students that have came are a lot more Amish, Mennonite children, and I think a lot of it would have been the stigmatism when it first started. Amish Mennonite families would have been more independent and felt like they should care for them on their own. And as time has went on, it's become a lot more acceptable, and I think it's become a huge blessing. I think it's a great thing for us as Mennonites to be able to have a facility like that to take care of our own people, and it has proved an immense blessing in that way. One example of that, Jeffrey Shirk came during my term there. He came in July of 23, and his family was from there's a Pilgrim church in Mississippi. I don't know the exact name of the church. That's on the tip of my tongue, but I forget. His family, he was there as a foster child, Jeffrey was, very autistic. I'm not sure what age he would have joined their family or he would have been there as a foster child. But pretty intense. He relied on a extremely consistent schedule. If they went to town and they passed a Chick-fil-A, which was his favorite restaurant, it was pretty much a temper tantrum every time if they didn't stop at Chick-fil-A. And temper tantrums were intense for him, swinging his head into things. And anyway, so he eventually came up for adoption, being under foster care, and they already had a number of children. I'm going to say 6 or 7 probably. And as it was, didn't have time to care for him. But he came up for adoption, and a gay couple was going to adopt him, and they couldn't have it. And so ultimately they ended up adopting him, and even though they really didn't have the time or resources and trusted God to take care of him. And so he was on the list for a long time to come to Faith Mission, and ultimately was able to come and take an immense burden off his parents. I mean, they love him dearly, but he has thrived at Faith Mission. A consistent schedule is something that since he's been there, he's learned how to ride a bike. He has just so many different ways that he has blossomed at Faith Mission. And that's just one example of being able to help Mennonite plain people, and they're there all the time visiting him. It's amazing to watch. Moving on from that a little bit, as far as the students, there's a lot that I could say about the students, many different types of them. As far as conditions, there's a lot of autism. That's probably the main thing. There's some alcohol fetal syndromes, things like that. It's mostly mentally handicapped, things down that line. So the home is where I worked. That's the main building where the more handicapped children stay. That's where Faith Mission started. That's the original home. So when you come there, you come as a floater, which basically means you fill in. You're trained in on a bunch of various positions. You're trained in to take care of groups. There's 5 groups for the boy students, 5 groups for the girl students, and they're labeled A through E. And each one has a designated child care worker. When they're on the floor working, that's what they're doing. So in my case, ultimately I was the C dad, which is the group of C boys. And when I was on shift, if I was working, that's who I was taking care of, was them. But as a floater, you get trained in on all those different groups. You get trained in on the A boys and the B boys and the C boys, and the girls would get trained in on the A girls through the E girls. And then you also get trained in on night duty. The girls get trained in for the kitchen. there's a bunch of different trainings. There's earlies and lates. That gets really complicated. But then whenever the ADAD is off, then the floaters, the newer guys, fill in and take care of the A-boys for the day while their designated child care worker is off for the day. And so as a floater, you get to work with all the different groups. You get to do night duty, which can be from 10 nights to 14 nights. It varies. And that's an experience like none other. I really enjoyed that because we don't generally do much night shift style working. And yeah, you always kind of think about it and like, what would it be like to work through the night? And that's your opportunity to do it. It's a lot of fun. The night duty guy actually does all of the laundry throughout the day. It all gets thrown down into one bin, and it can be piled yay high, and it's an immense amount of laundry. They have one huge commercial washer, and then 3 speed queens, and 2 commercial like gas dryers. And you get up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You technically don't get on shift on duty till 8 o'clock, but if you want to get on duty and not be sitting around waiting on your clothes that are in the washers and dryers, you wouldn't have anything to do. So you usually get up around 4 or 5 o'clock, go up there and sort that whole thing of laundry onto piles of colors and all the things that we generally didn't have a lot of experience doing. But trust me, you learned it pretty fast. 2 different loads of towels, loads of bedding, everything. And so you would get your first load started, and then just go mosey around for 45 minutes, whatever, come back, get your first loads in the dryer, start your next loads in the washer, and then ideally when you get on duty at 8 o'clock, you have carts of dry laundry that you can start folding or hanging up or whatever, hanging up the shirts and dresses, that type of thing, and all the pajamas and underwear gets folded. So anyway, that was a crazy thing to get used to doing, and but it became surprisingly normal. I think I did 67 nights of night duty during my time there. So you get quite used to it, mopping floors, that type of thing. Sunday mornings were kind of a wild time. They dress all the children for church Sunday morning. They have tan pants or black pants and like white 3-button long sleeve shirts. And it seems like a lot of work, but I guess as we heard this morning in the Sunday school lesson, we wear our best for God, for church. So they believe that there. And the students don't stay for the entire church service, but they go to what they call Children's Chapel, which is a special service before the main service. There's a church community there just like any other area. It's not just Faith Mission people. There's a Faith Mission fellowship with people that actually live in the area. They're not actually all involved with Faith Mission. And so the students go down there at 9 o'clock and have their own church till about 9:30, I guess it is. No, 9:45. 9:45, the normal church service starts. So that's, if you ever get the chance to visit, that's a fun thing to see. All the students will come in and sit, and they do some singing, and it's not the type of singing that we're used to. So where was I going? Oh, Sunday mornings, yes. So Sunday mornings on night duty, the night duty guy is responsible to get all the boys up and started. There's a few of them that needed showers for church. There's a few of the boys that stay for the actual church service. And so it could be complete mayhem. There's 20 boys back there and one guy, and dressing 20 handicap boys by yourself, as you're still pretty new, is you just get thrown in the deep end. It's crazy. I had broken windows sometimes. One time, that was rough. One of the students got frustrated, which was a common occurrence in the morning, and he likes to pound things. He just pound the mirror, pound this, whatever. But he just decided the window was a good thing and pounded that, and he hit it so hard. He was completely shocked that he broke it. It's actually quite hilarious. And then there was a glass on the floor. Anyway, there's endless stories I could tell about that. Being on extra is another thing that you do as a floater. If there's not something for you to cover for that day, as in taking care of a group or something, you're on extra. And so then you're at the maintenance man's mercy. And whatever he throws you at is what you do. So while I was there, they built a new barn, they call it. It's like an event center. They have farewells there, fancy banquets, lots of that play stuff in there. It's not set up for volleyball, but they also put a classroom in the bottom of that too. I'll talk a little bit about that later, or here soon. So the extra is a lot of fun. You just get out. I was able to do a little bit of electrical work. Blowing in the fall, they it's in the mountains. There's leaves everywhere, piles of leaves. And they have their own like big leaf vacuum thing that you pull around in a cart and suck up endless rows of leaves and that get grind up, put in a cart. So there's just lots of variety you get into with that. All right, and then I mentioned the CCWs a little bit, which is the child care workers, which is the position that I got. There's actually a number of classrooms which have teachers in them. There's like a craft classroom, there's a home ec classroom, and there's a barn class. All three of those are group classrooms. So you take your entire group there along with the child care workers, so it'd be like anywhere from 2 to 4 students, and usually 4, and the child care worker, and the classroom teacher. And those are fun times. Craft class, the students are stringing beads. They make all kinds of things. They actually sell some of the beads there. And there's barn class. Barn class started while I was there, which was pretty cool to have a new classroom start. They started to do, they have a bunch of animals down there, and so the idea is the students can come down and interact with animals and hold chickens, and yeah, there's a pig down there. I don't know why that thing ever existed, but it was a bit of a terror as it got bigger. It was like a little potbelly pig at first. And some rabbits. They have some birds there. The birds actually came since I would have left, some parakeets and stuff. So it's cool. Some of the students really enjoy it. Some of them are just like a little scared of the critters. You put stuff on their laps and they try to shove it off. And anyway, one of the stories that I'll tell is from barn class, and I was actually off this day, so I wasn't there. So one of my boys, his name is Wes McMahon, or McMahon. He's actually one of the older students there. He's been there for a long time. He's, I think, in his 40s. I actually kind of forget exactly how old he is. He never changes. He's just always the same. He's very slow walking, and he's like an old man with the mind of a teenager, I would say. He's pretty sharp. Like, he can communicate well. He talks more clear than some of them. And his entire world revolves around food. It's all about the next food, specifically brown food, which would be chocolate. He always calls it brown food. I don't know. If you ask him long enough, he'll say, like, oh, you want some brown food? And you're like, what kind of food? Brown food. What kind of food? Chocolate. And then you'll get it out of him. Like, he doesn't know how to say chocolate. He just calls things brown food. What else about him? I'm just trying to paint a picture for him so that it makes sense when I tell the story. But he memorizes the menu. Every time he passes through the kitchen after a meal to tell the cooks thank you, he'll hobble over. He has like a limp. He injured his leg once, so he walks real slow, and he walks over to the refrigerator, and he'll just stare. He can read. He'll memorize the whole menu. And so you can ask him, like, it was fun, like, in the morning when I was giving him a shower and stuff, I'd be like, Wes, what are we having for juice break? And he would be like, shoot, I can't even think, pickles and ham or whatever. Like, he would spit it right off, like he would know. And he was pretty much right all the time. Anyway, so pretty much, like, that was what he existed for. Like, if he was doing something and he knew he was doing a good job, like, will I get a treat or will I get something to eat? Anyhow, so they were in barn class the one day, and there was one of the chickens had died, and this is a very sad thing. And they decided for barn class that day. Barn class is like, with my group, they don't just super love the animals, so a lot of time it would just be me sitting down there. I would chat with the barn teacher, and we would just kind of goof off. But anyway, this day, Benji had my boys, because I was off anyway. This chicken had died, and said, well, you know what, we should just go have a funeral for this chicken. So they loaded up all my boys into the pickup with this dead chicken and went up on Dogwood Hill. So there's a farm there, and down the road, I'll let Brandon describe that. But they call it Dogwood Hill, and it's this big hill. It's kind of a pasture, but it's steep, and you go way up to the top of the hill, and people go up there to, like, stargaze and stuff. But anyway, I don't know why they decided to go up on Dogwood Hill, but that's where they were going to go bury this chicken. And so they went up there and unloaded all the boys and dug this hole for this chicken. And I guess Wes had gotten out of the truck, and he was there he can get quite amused by stuff, and he's like, what are we doing? And they told him, we're having a funeral for this chicken. And first thing out of his mouth, what kind of food are we having? That was the first thing on his mind. That was what he wanted to know, what food we were having at this funeral for this chicken. And they buried this chicken. They sang "We Are Going Down the Valley One by One," and it was quite the time. Hearing Benji tell the story to a bunch of Faith Mission people is just hilarious. It's 3 times funnier if you know Wes in the situation. Anyway, let's see. Is there anything else I want to explain with that? I think I covered. There's a lot of things about the daily routine that are fun, meal times, getting to eat with everybody. Obviously, you get to know all the staff really well. The teachers, there's one-on-one classes where you'll send your students off to just one-on-one with the teacher, and so that just gives the child care workers a break. It's half an hour where they have one less boy or girl that they don't have to be watching, taking care of. Keeping track of 4 of them day in and day out can be a lot. I should briefly talk about Samuel. I actually took Samuel one-on-one when he came, which is cool to be able to do that. I feel privileged that I was able to take him. When a student comes, they usually just go one-on-one with a child care worker for a while to get them familiarized with the place, learning the schedule and routine and all that. So I did that with him for 2 months. He was an Amish boy from Lancaster area, and he's actually about my age, just a little bit older than me, and autistic, but pretty easy to take care of. He didn't have some of the temper tantrums, that type of thing that some of the autistic ones can struggle with. Some of the smarter ones really struggle to express themselves and can get immensely frustrated with that. But Samuel, for the most part, was pretty straightforward, and then ultimately joined the group that I took then with 3 other boys. But Samuel was just always, he loved the playground. I'll talk a little about that later, but he was a handful to keep track of sometimes. The floaters even struggled with it probably more than me. So anyway, I've learned and experienced a lot of new things in my time at Faith Mission. There's a lot of things that you have to learn. You get thrown in pretty fast, a lot of trainings, that type of stuff. And usually we as staff go with the mindset that we're going to serve at Faith Mission and give of our time to these not as privileged people. That's kind of the way we view it. But the reality is that Faith Mission often serves us much more than we are able to serve them. And that's something that the administration will talk about. They see staff come and be all confident about they're going to tackle this and take care of these students, and ultimately the students are the ones that end up teaching us most of the lessons. They really do teach us more than we can teach them. It's easy to underestimate their ability to sense our moods when we're having bad days or whatever. Many of them have been at Faith Mission much, much longer than us staff have been, and they understand a lot about how things are to be done. And so some of them have their ways of humbling you for sure. And till the end of your term, you appreciate them a lot different than when you first go, and you recognize a lot of the things that they were able to teach you. There's many different things. Patience, learning to respect them for who they are, respecting what they can learn within their abilities, knowing the right amount to push them to learn new things, but also keeping it comfortable for them. The reality is Faith Mission is their home. That's where they live, and we're entering their home to take care of them. And so it takes time to grasp that responsibility. So relationships are a crucial part of Faith Mission Home. There's many different aspects of this. As Mennonites, we tend to do things smarter and not harder. I think we're raised to be that way. We're raised to work, to be efficient. We like to have plans for things. I do. I like to have a plan for what's happening. If there's not a plan, then I try to make one. And there's not anything wrong with that mindset. But at Faith Mission, efficiency isn't even in the dictionary. I'm kidding, but it's really not the game there. And that's something that takes a while to learn. If a student can do something, they're supposed to do it, and it's good for them to do it. It's things that they can do. We could do them 10 times faster. Setting a table, sweeping the floor, various things. There's a lot of different little jobs. Emptying trash cans is a big one that they do, and they take their time at it. But it's great for them to have jobs that make them feel worthwhile. They have their place. Jared was one of my boys, and he set tables, and he was quite slow at it. Like, he just took his time, and it was a struggle. Sometimes he would not be into it, and you'd have to push him to keep him going, to hold his plates and to walk around the table. You have to help him put them down at each spot, and it was just part of our day. You just get used to doing it, even though, I could have set the tables significantly faster. And it also just makes more time for developing relationships with other staff and with the students, when you don't have to worry about getting this quota, this amount of things done in the day. Your job is to make their life as enjoyable, but also being able to push them and teach them things. As far as the staff, they're obviously from all over, many varying backgrounds, different church groups, and anytime you work with a group of people for a long amount of time like that, there will be differences. That's just the fact of the matter. We have our own culture here, and you start looking at plain communities across the United States, and cultures are very different. There's different ways of doing things. And I had to learn if some people, they just do things differently, and you have to learn to melt. It's like a melting pot. Everybody's got to work together. It's one community there, and if you're pulling this way and everybody else is pulling this way, it doesn't work. And so that was something that I definitely had to learn. It's all part of it there. Working together. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, it says, "Therefore comfort each other and edify one another, just as you are doing." And I think that really sums it up there. Encouraging one another. While we were there, one of the staff guys, his dad passed away while we were there, and that was a really tough time. So over a time like that, it's just super important that staff are together. These people are kind of siblings to you, and so something like that is a huge deal, especially when it's fairly unexpected. There was a sledding accident that happened. I'm sure some of you heard about that. A bunch of girls flew down a hill, and there were some fairly serious injuries. And so times like that just pull all the staff together. When 3 of your girls, staff girls, just end up in the hospital for a period of time, everyone has to pull together to fill up their spots, make sure that their girls are taken care of, and so on. Another aspect of relationships is there's like a junior and a senior aspect to it. When you come, you're more junior, and as you progress through your term, you can become more and more senior. And simply all that means is the staff that come after you are more junior than you. So as you go, more staff come and staff leave, there's farewells, and so slowly you find yourself working up this ladder of being more senior. And there's responsibilities that come with that. You all of a sudden are the lead person in shifts. There's 2 people in the early, so now you're the one responsible to make sure things happen. And so you just start to realize the weight that carries. You're more responsible for the students. If something happens during the shift, it comes back on you. There's another thing that was a helpful thing to learn being there. And it makes you be a lot more serious about what you're doing whenever there's more junior people watching you do it, because there's ways of taking care of the students that are better than other ways. Another thing that you notice in Learn at Faith Mission is the students' childlike trust. We're basically their parents there, and that responsibility can be a lot. Their loyalty to the ones they know, and their loyalty to the ones they know and love is plainly evident. It's very easy to tell who spends the most time with their students, because they know who's their dad or mom, as we would say it. I have to think along that. How often am I not loyal enough to the one that I claim to love, being Jesus? Is my love for him plainly evident as it is with these students? I think it's a tremendous responsibility. I have to think of Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not on thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. And that verse becomes quite real at Faith Mission, because there's a lot of times you can't rely on your own understanding because you don't know how things work. That's the fact of the matter. You just don't know things. And so you can try to figure things out on your own, but ultimately you have to just learn from others, learn from the ones going before you. And and that strengthens your trust in God. And quickly, another thing about the students is just the simple joys that they get out of life. Samuel, I mentioned, he playing with stones on the playground was his thing. Like if he had any spare time, he would be trucking out to the playground and playing with stones. Any container that he could put stones in and dumping them out. And if he didn't have a container, he would just take his shoe off and he'd fill his shoe with stones and then carry his shoe around with his stones and stocking foot in the stones. And he would take them up to the top of the sliding board, dump them down the sliding boards. And if you know much about autism, they're very sensory. Things that feel, like running things through their hands is a huge thing. Noises, the noise of things going down a sliding board like that. And that's like kind of a running theme with some of them. You'll figure that out. But he would never tire of playing with stones. Christopher was another one of my boys. He loved getting rides. It didn't matter what it was. Pony cart rides, car rides, truck rides, van rides, all of it. And he talked about it all the time. And he came from a Mennonite family that was pretty Dutch, so he would Daffy car ride, Daffy truck ride, which is Dutch for can we go, can we do this, all the time. That was another thing I didn't expect with going to Faith Mission, was learning some Dutch, but I'm by no means fluent, but it's kind of fun to use sometimes. And then Wes's love of brown food, as I mentioned. I think we can probably relate with Alan fairly well. But anyway, in today's culture, many of us, including myself, we tend to be pretty high maintenance. We like the latest, greatest stuff, fancy things, fun vacations, life to be exciting. We don't like having nothing to do. At least I don't. If you have a weekend when absolutely nothing is planned, it's like, all right, let's make something happen here. We got to have stuff to do. And so I think that's a huge thing, just being able to appreciate the simple joys of life more. It's a great skill to cultivate, and it'll serve you well if you can learn to enjoy the little things in life. So in conclusion, living a life of service, ultimately I think our goal should be to live lives of service, not just going into service for a year or two and then coming out of it. How can we cultivate living a life of service? Matthew 25:40 says, "And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." This is basically saying, however we treat the lowest of society is how we're treating Jesus. And that's a huge challenge. I sometimes can't wrap my mind around that, but I believe that it is true. And Jesus loves everyone, we should as well. Let's live lives of service to our families, to our church, and those around us. If you get the chance to give your time to serve at a service unit somewhere, I'd say go for it. And something else, you don't have to be asked to serve. It's something that you can put your name out there and say, hey, I'd be willing to do this. And it is certainly an experience that you won't forget. So thanks for your attention.
Well, good evening. It certainly is good to be here with you all and share with you all. So Dylan did pretty well at introducing Faith Mission, especially to those of you who are less familiar with it. I think my family hears about it quite a bit. My dad especially kind of makes fun of me for talking about Faith Mission more than just about everything else combined. So I'll try to keep this short, try not to get too long-winded. So my main role at the home was a cottage staff, and I'm going to get into more of what that is. Pretty much there's two main branches of the home. You have the cottage students and you have the home students. Dylan and Sierra as well were both home staff, and me and Kelly were cottage staff. So a bit of history about the cottage program in particular. It started around the 1980s, I believe. The main need was there was a bunch of students at the home that would have been what we call higher functioning, more independent students. And a lot of those students that are at the home are ones that they need their very basic needs cared for. So they're students that they need help using the bathroom, taking a shower, brushing teeth, getting dressed, all that kind of thing. But there's another group of students that could pretty much do almost all of that by themselves. And so they didn't really fit in very well at the home. And so that's when the cottage program started. And pretty much the main concept of the cottage program is very family style oriented for the students. So it's generally about 4 students to a house. They have a house pretty much to themselves. It's split mostly between family area up top, and the basement would be the students area, along with a few designated single staff. It first started out with about 3 cottages, I believe, 6 cottage boys and about 3 or 4 cottage girls. Most of the cottage boys worked at the Pine Ridge Chicken Barns, and about 2 of them worked at what's now called Dogwood Farm, which is a farm that now raises cows, pigs, chickens, all kinds of different things, anything you'd pretty much have on a farm. And it pretty much grew from there. So now we have about, I believe it's 12 cottage guys, and I believe the number is about 9 or 10 cottage girls. The cottage girls have been coming and going. It's always a changing number since I've been there. The cottage boys are a bit more, I don't want to call them more stable, but a bit more consistent number. Right now there's about 6 cottages, 3 for the guys, 3 for the girls. And yeah, once again, the guys are roughly 4 students per cottage. The girls' numbers works out a little bit different than that. I'm not quite sure the arrangement. It kind of depends on how many are there at any given time. Each of the cottage has a name. This is pretty confusing the first time you visit. So there's Oak Ridge Cottage, Pine Ridge Cottage, and Dogwood Cottage. All for the guys. They're all named after trees. That's an easy way to remember it. My job at the home was a little bit complicated. So my primary place of residence, where I slept for the night and everything, was at Oak Ridge Cottage, but I was primarily in charge of the Pine Ridge boys. And I also worked a fair amount with the Oak Ridge boys, and that's different from the band. Very different, but I don't know who named them. But pretty much each cottage for the guys centers around a working location. So Oak Ridge Cottage is centered around a wood shop. We call it the master shop. They pretty much make everything and anything and everything. A big thing they make is foosball tables, very high quality foosball tables. They also make marble chase boards, which is a game about this big. Plays very similar to Sorry, marbles that go around a track. And they also do a lot of cabinet work. They've done a lot of work in updating a lot of the buildings there, putting in fresh cabinets there. Pine Ridge Cottage is centered around 2 different places. It would be the cutting board shop, which is where I spent most of my time, and also the Pine Ridge Barn, which was chickens. They collect eggs, help clean. The Oak Ridge guys help with that a little bit as well. And then the Dogwood. Dogwood is mostly centered around the farm. They have all kinds of different chores down there. Mostly chickens, pigs, cows, and also they do a bit of crop raising and stuff too. Each cottage is assigned a house parent, so there's a family that lives there and cares for the students, and each cottage is also assigned a single staff. So the house parent and the single staff pretty much share responsibility of the boys, fill in for each other when the other person has off, and if they're both off at the same time, the other staff come in and share the load. The cottage program tends to be a lot easier of a time caring for the students. They're a lot more independent. It's a lot of guys where you can just say, go and do this, and they go. And there's little fear of them running off or drinking something they shouldn't, like there is up at the main home. All right, so the primary job of the staff is to pretty much you have your job in the shop. So I'm pretty much in the cutting board shop. I'm pretty much doing my own work most of the time. The boys sort of come and go throughout the day. There's a classroom in the cutting board shop where pretty much all the Oak Ridge and Pine Ridge boys all come at once and sit in the classroom. It's a very kind of a crude classroom. It's pretty much a small room with a table at either side, and they're pretty much on their own to do very elementary level schoolwork. There are a variety of levels of ability and stuff like that, so it's sort of hard to teach like you'd think of as a teacher. My job mainly involves having devotions with them, maybe singing a song or two, praying with them, and then they're sort of on their own, and I'll be around to help out if they need. Some of them need, or at least think they need, quite a lot of help to get through their stuff. Others can kind of just write stuff down, and it's fine. It is actually one of the sadder parts about home life, it is actually very difficult to teach them things that are new. A lot of the newer students can make progress, but the ones that are in the cottage program, they kind of hit a peak, and they sort of stay there, and you can maintain what they already know by schoolwork. That's the main job of the classroom, but you can't really go any higher than that. Some of the cottage boys, I believe 3 of them, were some of the first cottage students, so they've been around about 40 years or so at the home there. Some of them close to 50. I believe the longest students have been there about 50 years. So quite a long time. The home is pretty much all they know. All right, so the girls' cottages then is pretty similar to the guys' cottages, but it's pretty much centered around just the bake shop. There's not really individual workshops. It's all at the bake shop. And the arrangement is a little bit different. There's 2 house parents that oversee the cottage girls and about 8 single staff. So the house parents, the 2 families, the men would do a bit of work with the cottages, but not much. One of the men would be the bake shop manager. The wives help a little bit, but they also have children and other responsibilities. So that puts a lot more pressure on the other staff, so therefore they need more single staff to carry the load. There's about 4 cottage single staff for the guys, 8 for the girls. And they're largely centered around the bake shop. The bake shop is quite a big deal. It brings a decent chunk of income in for the home. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's well more than enough to provide all the food, enough money to provide for all the food for the entire home. There's also one of the cottages includes a classroom where I believe all the girls go through there sometime throughout the day and attend class. Kelly was actually the classroom teacher for a few months. So if you have any questions about that or the girls' cottage in general, I can't share a super amount of details, so talk to her if you want to know more about that. All right, I could go into a lot of detail about different staff and different things like that. I worked there longer than most cottage staff. I should also mention, when you go as cottage staff, you pretty much go straight to a cottage. The main home, they have a floater that goes around and you fill in for different roles and oversee different things, and eventually a position. Cottage staff, you pretty much go get a position and you're that position for most cases your entire term, and that was the case for me. So one man that I worked extremely closely with was a man named Ed Albertson. Him and his wife Pam, they're from a non-Mennonite, non-Christian background even. Very, very fascinating story. I won't share a lot of detail. Pretty much both of them at one point were smoking addicts, drug addicts, a bunch of different stuff. Ed was actually in the Navy for, I believe he did a 9-month training. He didn't actually go on, they were going on a voyage. He was going to be assigned to an aircraft carrier for about 9 months. He was dating Pam at the time, so he decided to drop out of the Navy. Anyways, through a set of babysitters, I believe it was, they came to Christ and spent a decent amount of time at the home. The normal commitment for a house parent is 3 years. They've been there over 12. They've been there quite a long time. And Ed actually mainly started the cutting board shop there, made it what it is today. Ed's just a fascinating man to work with. I work with him more probably than anybody else, and it's a very great bouncing ideas off each other. We complement each other very well. He pretty much says himself, he has about 0 eye for creativity or design and that kind of thing. And that was a bit of my specialty in the shop. And a bit of my weakness was initiative, getting projects rolling. It was often where I'd come to him with an idea, something I had bombing around in my head, and he said, "Great, let's do it." Full bore, he'd go for it. He'd get it done. Just an incredible man, incredible work ethic. Another thing about him, he was extremely honest. So I was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, especially when starting out. He was the first person to tell you when you messed up. He said, "Hey, you did this, I want this done different," that kind of thing. And he was also one of the first people to really congratulate you, tell you you did a good job. Another man I worked quite closely with was a man named Abe Dyke. They would have been the family that worked at the Oak Ridge Cottage. I'd oversee his boys some. I shared a basement with them, with his boys, so I bumped heads with him a bunch. Very fascinating man. He's sort of an inventor. He comes up with all kinds of crazy stuff and a bunch of crazy ideas. A fascinating guy to work with. And he actually has a bit of a rough background too. He was Russian Mennonite and he was also, I believe, addicted to drugs as well at one point, but came out of that and is now doing very well. Him and his family are just really great to be around, great to have fun and talk with. All right, it is really, really hard to talk about Faith Mission without talking about the boys. So, just to give you a bit of a visual for who we're talking about, sorry if you can't see this. This is a picture. This is pretty much the boys from 2 cottages. So this is Oak Ridge. Is this going to sit? There we go. Pretty much the boys from Oak Ridge and Pine Ridge Cottage. The handsome guy in the middle there is me. So, pretty much these are the guys that I taught in the class. The boys that aren't pictured here would be the Dogwood boys, boys I didn't work with a crazy amount. I still got to know them, some just not nearly as well as these fellows. So the boys that are my primary responsibility, pretty much these 3 guys across the back, and this fellow right down here. So this is Micah Yoder, Sam Smith, Jason Miller, and Francis Brown. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all of them individually. I will touch on a few of them. Micah and Sam here in the back, these are guys that are pretty much defined Pine Ridge for my term. They're very, very high functioning. easily the highest functioning students at the home, which makes for very, very interesting, very difficult scenarios sometimes. Both of them often offer the sentiment that they don't want to be there. They'd rather be somewhere else, rather be hanging out with their friends. They're also bright enough to know that they're not that bright, which makes things very difficult. Sam in particular, he's been there about 3 or 4 years. He has had an extremely rough past, as a lot of these boys have. When he was about 12 years old, he was in a car accident that killed both his parents. So he was sort of floating around between some of his brothers. His one brother, his name's Scott, cared for him quite a bit, and they had a good bit of vicious arguments. They did not have a good relationship at all. And so when Sam came to the home, he was an absolute mess. He was halfway suicidal. He was often depressed. He would often talk about like dragons and stuff flying up the ridge and seeking after him and all kinds of different stuff like this. A lot of it was fake, a lot of it was for attention, but he has a lot of stuff to deal with. He has a bit of bipolar, so one minute he's happy, the other minute he's not. But he has made a lot of progress. By the time I took him, which was about 3 years in, he was doing quite well, and he was probably one of the best behaved students, although with some mood swings and different stuff like that, that was difficult to deal with. One other fellow that is not pictured here is a man by the name of Kev Stevens. He was one of the few students that would have left in my term, the only cottage guy that would have left in my term. Probably more than anybody else, the guy that really defined my term. He would be considered nonverbal. He'd say a word or two, pretty much enough to get his point across, things like hat and different stuff like that. He had a few passions. One of them was his aforementioned orange hat. It was an orange hat, bright as a traffic cone. He would not leave the house without it. He needed his orange hat. He also loved hot sauce, like incredible passion for hot sauce. And he was actually caught drinking hot sauce a few times. That's how much he liked the stuff. And his other passion is the other way, dogs. This man hated dogs, was terrified of them like you would not believe. And this is a big black guy, 6 foot tall, 180 pounds. And there's this little dog at Oak Ridge. It's about this big, this little black ankle biter. He was scared to death of the dog. He could just give it a kick and send it flying, but it didn't matter. If the dog was anywhere in sight, he'd go squealing up back to the house. Wanted nothing to do with it. I spent many a day trying to coax him down to Oak Ridge for lunch, but he knew the dog was there. He did not want to come. He was very hesitant. And usually his reward for making it there was giving him hot sauce, which is kind of funny. All right, so that's all for the Pine Ridge fellas. The other fellas up here are the Oak Ridge guys. Jeff Beaver is in the back. I believe a number of you have met him. He's very notorious in the cottage. He's a guy that's been there. He came to the cottage when he was about 3 years old, and now he's in his 50s. So about all he knows is faith mission. He's kind of the point caller. He has a distinction of being able to talk very well, and also translates for the other guys. The other Oak Ridge boys tend to be very hard to understand, so especially when there's a visitor there, he's the man there interpreting. And sometimes he thinks he's staff as well, so he kind of gets in the way of what you're trying to accomplish. The next guys down here at the bottom on either side of me, Robert Wentz, we call him Bob, and Alex Hubbard. These two guys are very similar with a little bit of distinction. They're both very routine-minded. They want this done, and this done, and this done, and this done. They could do the same thing every single day for the rest of their life and be happy. And if you throw them out of their routine, it causes a lot of problems. They'll both often get angry, get frustrated. It's a big problem to deal with. They also can be quite energetic and quite enthusiastic about random things. If you're picking favorites, those are probably my two favorites. Just tons of fun to deal with. And also the fellow in the end. This is Tom Abrams. I saved the best for last. This man is one of the most fascinating human beings I think I've ever met. He has a specific talent. He can tell you the day of the week you were born if you give him your birthday. So if you gave him the day and the year, he will tell you the day of the week in an instant. So Arvin and Alice both visited the home a while back, and we met Tom Abrams. He's very hard to understand. I was there interpreting. But I told him, ask him on the birthday. So Arvin said, January 16, 1951. He said, Tuesday. Just that quick. Turned to Alice, March 30, 1953. Monday. Just that quick. Didn't even have to think about it. He just knows. And also, that was 70 years ago. He's not even 70 years old. He's in his 60s somewhere. So he can remember days of the week of random people that are older than he is just off the top of his head. And he also has an incredible memory. So I could go back there this day, and he would know the date I came, the day I left. He'd know my birthday. He knows my mom's birthday, my dad's birthday, and a bunch of other random people. I even asked him about my uncle. My uncle was there in 1988 to 89, I believe. So just a random staff guy. Once again, there's been 1,500 staff. I asked him, do you know who Malin Lapp is? Oh, yeah, he was here 88 to 89. His wife was here too, 87 to 89. His daughter was here too, 14 to 16. Like, he knew all of it in an instant. I could tell many stories about him. He also has a very, very bizarre sense of humor. There was a new school teacher that started working there that he had a kind of a weird obsession with. So he would go around saying, please stay away from the new school teacher. She's dangerous. Something he said quite a lot, which is very humorous. All right, I'm going to leave them fellas up there. You can take a closer look at it later if you wish. All right, so real quickly, my daily schedule. So the morning shift was called the early. This mostly involves eating breakfast with the boys. Once again, my guys are quite capable, so they actually made most of their own breakfast and served it, set the table, everything like that. I was pretty much up there to supervise. Me and the house parent would both split earlies, so we'd have an early about half the day of the week. An early would start at 7, the normal shift started at 8. So throughout the day, as I mentioned before, was work in the shop. It usually involved me just doing my own thing. The boys would come and go. They had their list of chores to do, slightly different throughout the week, but once again, routine and schedule are very important to them. So they have a very specific schedule they follow day after day. All the Oak Ridge and Pine Ridge boys would come for class about 9 o'clock. They'd be there till about 10:30. And about 11:30, I dismissed them for lunch. And they'd walk to lunch. These guys pretty much walked everywhere on campus. About a 15 to 20-minute walk for a lot of places. Dogwood Farm would have been quite the hike. That's way down the hill from the main area. They got their hours in, for sure, or got their miles in. Lunch is one of the highlights of the day. Lunch was pretty much served at various campus families. Once again, there's 12 campus families. We'd eat about 10 of them. We didn't eat at the girls' cottage families because they had responsibilities with the girls' cottage. But that's just a great time. All the cottage boys would go to one cottage and have lunch, and all the staff would be there as well. Shift usually ends at 5. You're off duty after that unless you have a late. Late is another good time. It depends on your mood, I guess. Sometimes it can be a bit frustrating. The late is pretty much from about 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and it's one staff in charge of all 12 cottage boys. And this is actually quite an enjoyable time. It's usually full. Usually eat supper with them. The home makes supper for you, so you bring supper for the boys. And then you sing, have devotions, read them a story, and then they are off to pretty much do their thing. They play games. They love playing games. Marble Chase is one of the favorites. It's a good game that they have a wide variety of abilities. It's one the simpler ones can understand how it works, and the not-so-simple ones can actually have some fun with it and actually have some strategy in it. So late's a very good time. After a late, you go around to their individual cottage and drop them off, and they go to bed. All right. I was going to talk about staff life a little bit. I'll mainly skim it just for sake of time. Staff life is definitely the highlight of being at Faith Mission. So I'm not sure if we mentioned this before, but cottage staff and home staff, throughout the day, it's very much the cottage people are over here taking care of cottage students, the home people are over here taking care of home students. But other than that, off-duty time is pretty much everybody all together. So pretty much every evening is an activity, things from rec night, which is volleyball, dorm night, which is all the guys get onto the dorm. We often make food, just have a good time. That's usually about once a month. About once or twice a week is called a free night. Just as it sounds, you can pretty much do whatever you want. There's often a group that goes out to town, goes shopping, that kind of thing. Town is about a half-hour drive, so it's kind of a privilege. Going to Walmart is definitely more of an excursion than it is where I live, where it's a 2 or 3 minute drive. So often we go out into town, do random stuff. Like one time we played tennis on top of a parking garage because all the courts are full and that kind of thing. Free nights are often doing a lot of random dumb stuff. A few nights we've took in a big old tub of ice cream, went down to the graveyard, and had an ice cream party. It's a very random spot to eat ice cream, but it's quite enjoyable. The stars are very beautiful at night. And another big center of staff life is days off. So pretty much every staff throughout the week is assigned a day off, usually a day Monday or Tuesday through Friday. If everybody would have off the same day, the home would not be able to function. The students need somebody working pretty much 24/7, so it would not work to have everybody off on a Saturday. So your days off are spread out throughout the week. And these are full of all kinds of different stuff. Anything under the sun, name it, has probably been done at Faith Mission. A variety of things. Very chill days are often what happens, especially in the winter. Things like going to a cabin, playing games, drinking coffee, chatting, that kind of thing. And then you have the not so chill days. One random group of crazy people, I don't know why they decided to do this, they woke up about, I believe it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they drove to New York City, which is about a 6-hour drive. They went and saw the Statue of Liberty, and then hopped in their car and turned around and drove straight back. And they got home around 5 o'clock in the evening. That is one example. Another group of staff, I won't mention any names, it rhymes with Elin. They decided they're going to find cheap plane tickets and fly to Florida. So they woke up at, I don't forget what time, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning? 1:30. They left at 1:30 in the morning and drove to Dulles Airport and flew to Florida. Orlando, Florida. They rented a Tesla, bombed around town for the day, and then flew back. And that was all in just one day. One thing that was talked about for a lot, Dylan, that's one thing in Dylan's belt he quite appreciates that he was able to do. And then everything else in between. One of my crazier days, we called up a former staff from Belleville and asked him to take us hunting for the day. That was something he offered to do, so that was another crazy experience we did. A whole group stuffed in a tree stand, freezing to death, and making baked beans on a stove. It was a good day. All right, so really quickly, a few things I learned when I worked there. Once again, Ed, the man I worked with, he taught me many things. The main thing that developed was my work style when I was working there. He is extremely particular about his shop, keeping things cleaned and organized, and from my prior work experience, I was not that way. I tended to be scatterbrained, laying things here and there, just kind of making a mess and leaving things disorganized. So one important thing I learned to do was just kind of make a round at the end of the day, clean up all my stuff, and put it away, and keep going. And the other thing was determination, sticking at a task, seeing it through, staying at one particular task till it was done. It's a bit hard to do with the boys around. Once again, in a shop like that, efficiency sort of goes out of the picture, especially when you have a guy that throws a hissy fit about a random thing in the middle of the day. The things that need to be dealt with and work just have to kind of get put on hold till you have that all taken care of. One other important thing I learned was the benefit of just being okay with missing out on stuff. So at the home, a lot of just random stuff happens, and you just have to learn that you can't do everything, especially at the cottage. It's kind of easy to think that all the party, all the life happens at the home. You're just there sort of doing your own thing. You miss out on stuff. I had to learn just to be okay with that. And another important thing I learned that goes right along with it is that God's will is much less about the position you find yourself in. It's more about what you do in that position. So especially leading up to serving there, I weighed it quite heavily. I was comparing it to things like teaching, other service opportunities like Allegheny Boys Camp, thinking, is this the right thing for me to do? Is this God's will for me to do? I'm very much a perfectionist, which means I want to know this is the best place, the most ideal place for me to be right now. And once I was there, I eventually just realized that I'm just going to make the best of this. Especially in the cottage, it's easy to think this is not the most glamorous position. Other things are better. And I decided to learn that I have to stick at this and make the best of it. And once you decide that this is where I'm at, I'm going to put work into it, you'll enjoy it a whole lot more. So in conclusion, I learned a lot. The experience was very good. I would highly recommend it to anybody who is considering it, and very enjoyable. You definitely will not regret it.
Well, Delenn and Brandon, thank you for that. I think we've been encouraged, somewhat entertained, learned hopefully a little more for each of you what Faith Mission is about. And I was going to say something in my opening, and I did not, and I'm kind of glad I didn't say this, but a lot of these children that they're talking about, and you can see how close they are to their boys. They're not cute and cuddly. There's missing teeth. There's hair sticking out every which way. For the most part, they behave fairly well when I've been there during a meal. I think there was only one time that I lost my appetite because of somebody acting up. But it's amazing how the staff there, most of them, become very close to their students. So. Anyway, thank you again for that. That's all. Stand for a word of prayer. And Darwin, do you mind leading us in prayer?
Lord, thank you again for this opportunity to hear about service opportunities. You've called us to many areas of places where we need to serve. And some are more glamorous than others. Call us to be willing to serve where you've called us to. This week as we go about our duties, may you lead us to people that need help. Help us to be willing to lend a helping hand in our listening ear. Bless us as we leave this place. Help us to be faithful in serving you. Grace and honor. Amen.
Here's Smith.